So sometime in the next 10 to 15 years, China's economy will become number one, and United States, for the first time in 130, 140 years, will become the number two economic power in the world. Now, that would be a huge shock. Which school of thought is correct? Is Xi Jinping destroying capitalism in China, or is Xi Jinping rejuvenating capitalism in China? The two schools of thought. We'll find out within 10 years. But as a betting man, I place my bets on the second school of thought.
Okay.
Will China emerge as an angry dragon or a peaceful dragon? And we don't know the answer to that because it's what we do today that will determine whether China emerges as an angry dragon or as a peaceful dragon. I think both are possible.
Get ready for an eye-opening interview with Professor Kishore Mahbubani. In this video, he delves into why China's rise has left the United States on edge. Will China ascend peacefully, or is it destined to become the angry dragon? Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Watch now.
As you know, I've written another book
Thankfully, you
on US-China relations. My latest one has China One, and which unfortunately says on page one of the book, it says the US-China geopolitical contest was launched by Donald Trump, but he will outlast Trump. Unfortunately, Biden proved me correct. He continued it. Even Biden and Trump disagreed on everything except on China. So there is obviously a bipartisan consensus in the United States on China. And as I explain in my book, what the US is doing is rational behavior of superpower. No superpower ever gives up its number one status willingly. Never. It'll fight to maintain it as long as possible. So sometime in the next 10 to 15 years, China's economy will become number one, and United States, for the first time in 130, 140 years, will become the number two economic power in the world. Now, that would be a huge shock for the United States. And so when the United States is going all out to stop the rise of China, that is normal behavior. We should expect it. That's what happens for thousands of years of history. Of course, we hope that the contest will be played out peacefully and not in the form of a major war between the two sides. And that's what. Sound?
I think maybe your microphone touched your neck there. Yeah,
All right, you bring the mic down a bit lower.
you're good.
Okay. And I think we can prevent a war between U.S. and China, but it requires a process, a very complex process of them talking to each other regularly so that they understand clearly where each other's red lines are. And that, unfortunately, is not happening now. So on US and China, I'm actually somewhat, well, I think on Taiwan, they have receded. The danger of a nuclear war has receded. The overall relationship remains very difficult. And just today, a friend of mine in Washington, D.C. sent me a message. He's a very seasoned observer of Washington, D.C. He said, sure, the mood in Washington, D.C. today is so anti-China that if Biden gives any hint that he's going to be soft or flexible on China, he'll be killed. So this is an example of how difficult it is to get peace in the world, because countries get locked into positions. And for in the United States today, it's politically impossible for any of the politicians to stand up and say, hey, why don't we reboot and consider a different policy towards China? That's impossible. I would say that on the subject you just raised, is there a cultural revolution taking place or coming back to China? I can say confidently that there are two schools of thought. The first school of thought, I would say, is what you will find in the Anglo-Saxon media, that this is clearly Xi Jinping going back to the ideological roots of the Chinese Communist Party and saying the time has come now, China is rich enough, now we can go back to socialism. We're going to crack down on these big firms, big tech, and now focus on redistributing the pie. And as you know, the phrase used is common prosperity, and let's take care of people at the bottom, and so on and so forth. So, and if that happens, of course, if indeed he's cracking down on industries and big tech and big money and all that, then you could see, in a sense, in theory, a retreat from capitalism. People will stop investing in China, and frankly, the Chinese economy will collapse. Okay, so that's school number one. And I would say it is. I don't rule it out completely. I don't say it's there's a zero prospect of that happening. But there is another school of thought that says that actually Xi Jinping appreciates what China has accomplished under the free market system. Its economy has grown faster than any other countries in the last 30 years, right? I mean, just imagine that in purchasing power parity terms, China's GNP was 10% of the United States in 1980. 2014, it became bigger in PPP terms. In nominal market terms, the US GNP was 8 times the size of China's. Now is only 1.5 times larger.
Whoa, you've made it this far, which means you're hooked. And trust me, it only gets better from here. We're about to dive into some game-changing insights that you won't want to miss. But hey, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts so far. And if you're loving this, smash that like button and subscribe. It seriously helps the channel and keeps you in the loop for more epic content. All right, let's jump back in.
So this had a tremendous track record. But he thinks that at this point in time, there have also been some excesses have developed. Excesses have developed in the sense of the big firms becoming too large and monopolistic and trying to control the regulators in the same way that big tech in the United States controls the regulators in Washington, D.C. So as you know, in my book, I have a chapter on how United States has become functionally a plutocracy, which is a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And Xi Jinping is saying, I do not want a plutocracy in China. And I'd rather that we break down the power of these large monopolistic giants. And that's what he's doing. And if that's what he's doing, paradoxically, he may actually unleash entrepreneurial energy by restricting the power of the big tech. Because today, and in fact, there was an article in the Financial Times today, if I'm not mistaken, saying that the big tech in the US is so successful, every time a potential competitor emerges, they gobble it up before it can become big enough to be a threat. And there's a guy who's a real expert on artificial intelligence. He's one of the biggest investors in artificial intelligence. He's written one of the definitive books on it. His name is Li Kai-fu. And I heard him speak at a interview with The Economist. And in the interview, he's invested in 1,000 startups in China. He says all these new moves make it easier for his startups to succeed because they can no longer be eaten up by the giants. So paradoxically, even though in theory Xi Jinping is cracking down on big tech, actually he may be unleashing entrepreneurial energy now. Frankly, which school of thought is correct? Is Xi Jinping destroying capitalism in China, or is Xi Jinping rejuvenating capitalism in China? The two schools of thought. We'll find out within 10 years. But I, as a betting man, I place my bets on the second school of thought.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing we can learn from China is that you can take a country where in 1980, about the figures vary, like 80 to 90% of the people lived in poverty, okay? 80 to 90%. And today it's almost down to zero. China's poverty eradication program is the most impressive and most successful poverty eradication program in human history. It's a tremendous accomplishment. For me, poverty eradication is actually very important because actually I was born in poverty. I know what it's like. I was put in a special feeding program when I was 6 years old. I didn't have a flush toilet. I've lived through all that. So I think eradicating poverty should be the number one moral imperative in the world. And China is the leading example of how it can be done and how we should learn lessons from China in that area. And in terms of how we adapt to China, I think it is a fact that whenever a new great power emerges, the world order has got to change, reorient itself, right? And the question is whether or not, to put it very simply, will China emerge as an angry dragon or a peaceful dragon? And we don't know the answer to that because it's what we do today that will determine whether China emerges as an angry dragon or as a peaceful dragon. I think both are possible, which is why my thesis is that we should try to work with China as it is rising and persuade China to accept the current Western rules-based order that is a gift from the West to the rest of the world. And fortunately, as of now, China actually loves the rules-based order because China has succeeded in developing so well in the last 30 years because the rules-based order has facilitated China's rise. So the World Trade Organization is responsible for China emerging as the world's number one trading power today. So it is not in China's interest to disrupt the rules-based order. But all this can work out if you work out an understanding with China. But if there's no understanding with China, and if there is growing tension and conflict, then it is possible that China could emerge as an angry dragon. Then I think the world will be a less comfortable place.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you loved it. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Can't wait to see you in the next one. Stay awesome.